For thousands of years, fishermen have set their nets, baited their hooks, and gathered in the bounty of the sea. These hunters and gatherers have contributed to the development of civilization, to the world's supply of food, and to the economic well-being of many nations. As human populations have grown, so has the demand for food from the sea. For much of human history, people have thought of the ocean as a vast, inexhaustible reservoir of fish. As a result, fishing pressure has increased until many nearshore areas, the traditional fishing grounds, have become overexploited. We now know that there are limits to how much we can take from the sea. People are beginning to look to the sea not so much with the eyes of fishermen as with the eyes of farmers. Farmers of the sea are building an entirely new industry called aquaculture. This industry, which involves cultivating aquatic plants and animals, is still small but growing. Already there are farmers of the sea on nearly every continent and ocean. They raise 10% of the world's aquatic produce. Filipinos, for example, have fenced nearly 500,000 acres of water in which they raise captive milkfish. In Singapore, sea bass live at amazing densities in floating cages. The Japanese raise voracious eels in heated greenhouses, while Americans raise trout using geothermally heated water. Scotsmen confine migratory Atlantic salmon, carefully tending them until harvest. The products of aquaculture also include giant prawns, freshwater sturgeon, ornamental goldfish, precious cultured pearls, and much, much more. In these activities and in these products, we see the beginning of a new way of looking at our planet's aquatic resources. The beginning of a blue revolution. What is this blue revolution? Where did it originate? And where is it taking us? What will it mean to consumers, to businessmen, to fishermen, and to the needy people of developing nations? What roles are science and technology playing in its evolution? To answer these questions, we begin in Japan, where aquaculture was born of necessity. The sea has always been a vital source of food for this island nation, with its 18,000 miles of coastline. The country has little in the way of food-producing resources. Less than 20% of its rugged mountainous land is suitable for agriculture. Smaller in size than the state of California, Japan has more than half the population of the United States. Early on, the Japanese learned to use the ocean to feed their large population. Japanese fleets roam the four oceans, searching for high-quality fish. It's 5 a.m. These quick-frozen tuna are arriving at the Osaka market, where more than 500,000 pounds of fish will be sold before mid-morning. Market manager Toshio Otaka explains.
The tuna which comes into the country is mostly caught overseas, especially off New Zealand and the Indian Ocean fishing grounds. They are caught by hook and line.
The Japanese people have an enormous appetite for food from the sea. In the course of a year, the average Japanese eats 70 pounds of seafood, about 6 times as much as the average American. A popular way of eating fish is at the sushi bar, where most seafood is served uncooked. Japanese chefs show great imagination in finding ways to prepare and present almost anything that crawls, floats, or swims in the sea. But even for the Japanese, the future for traditional fisheries is uncertain. Many nearshore fish stocks have collapsed under relentless fishing pressure. Others have succumbed to pollution. The high cost of fuel jeopardizes the long-distance fishing fleets. And recently, most countries restricted foreign fishing in their waters. Japanese fishermen were shut out of many of their favorite fishing grounds. Resourceful and aggressive, the Japanese have been quick to adopt aquaculture to ensure their supply of fresh aquatic delicacies. In fact, restaurants will often pay more for cultured fish because growers can better control their size and quality. The aquaculture industry does well in Japan, partly because the government, at various levels, has invested heavily in its success. The Ijimi Prefectural Research Station is one of scores of laboratories where specialists help local businessmen solve the scientific and technological problems facing this new industry. Young brine shrimp, for example, are studied to help determine the most productive and economic diets. With this research and development help, aquaculture in Japan has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry. But not all of the products raised here are meant to be eaten. In the cold waters off Shikoku Island, pearls are cultured on a grand scale. Pearls grow inside pearl oysters, which, in nature, attach themselves to the bay bottom or to other suitable hard surfaces. But Japanese aquaculturists have learned to suspend these pearl oysters beneath floating buoys and bamboo rafts. In this way, they can raise many oysters in the limited space available in each bay. In nature, a tiny piece of sand or other foreign particle forms the nucleus of a pearl. Natural pearls form by chance. When they do, the process can take years. But the Japanese have found a reliable way to speed this process. During the winter months, workers remove tubs full of young oysters from beneath the floating rafts and carry them inside to a surgical assembly line. Workers pry the oysters open one by one and implant what will become the nucleus of a cultured pearl. Around this nucleus, the pearl oyster will lay down layer upon layer of calcium until it has built a pearl. When the operation is finished, the oysters are placed on wire racks and returned to the bay to grow until harvest. Periodically, the Japanese clean the oysters of barnacles and seaweeds to improve growth rates. After about 3 years, workers again pry open each pearl oyster, this time hoping to retrieve a marketable gem. Only about 1/3 of the pearl oysters survive until harvest. 3 in 100 will produce a truly valuable gem. Nevertheless, that rate of success is much better than in nature. One of Japan's leading pearl producers, the Mikimoto Company, processes 3,000 pearls a day, grading them according to size, luster, shape, color, and flawlessness. A single strand of cultured pearls can be worth $100,000. The Japanese were quick to recognize the vast potential of aquaculture to produce income and jobs. In some cases, they have found ways to blend old traditional fisheries with new sea farming techniques. The ocean around Shikoku Island is full of tiny bait fish. Fishermen have long been able to catch more than they could sell. Aquaculturists, on the other hand, have wanted to raise high-value carnivorous fish, such as the yellowtail, but the cost of feeding them has been too high. Today, fishermen and sea farmers work together. The fishermen catch bait fish and sell them to the sea farmers, who feed them to the yellowtail. In the process, the two groups have become dependent upon each other. Japanese fishermen now sell 20% of their catch to sea farmers. With this dependable source of feed, sea farmers have created a new industry and pioneered new seafood markets. In recent years, yellowtail meat has become a favorite food in Japan. The tradition of aquaculture is well established in the East. It did not begin in Japan, however. The Chinese were practicing aquaculture 4,000 years ago, but they were doing it in fresh water. It is said the Chinese emperors were the first patrons of fish farming. They loved to eat fish, and they insisted on being served fresh fish year-round. The object of their patronage was the carp, a fish still held in high esteem. In 475 BC, Fan Li wrote the first account of what he called water husbandry. His guide to raising carp was based on sound scientific principles that are still basic to fish culture. The Chinese have an ancient saying, if you give a person a fish, he will have food for one day. If you teach him to grow fish, he will have food for a lifetime. The words hold true in modern China, where aquaculture has become an important source of food. In fact, China now leads the world in pounds of cultured fish produced. The Chinese have developed one of the most elegant and efficient forms of aquaculture, growing not one but many varieties of fish in a single pond. This system is called polyculture. It is based on the efficient use of energy and nutrients that pass through the pond. Carp ponds like these can be found in many of the southern provinces of China, in the new territories of Hong Kong, and on Taiwan. Ducks and other livestock fertilize the water with their droppings. Beneath the pond surface, we find many kinds of carp, each feeding at a different level in the food chain, all surviving in harmony. Feeding at the surface on aquatic plants or vegetable greens supplied by the grower is the grass carp. Further down in the water column is the bighead carp that feeds on tiny aquatic animals, and the silver carp that feeds on tiny plants. The mud carp eats bottom-dwelling creatures and decayed plant and animal matter. It shares this ecological niche with the common carp. In some ponds, one might also find black carp feeding on snails and clams. In China, aquaculture is driven by the country's need to produce as much food as possible from each acre of land. In the United States, a country already rich in agricultural products, the motivation for those wishing to culture fish has been economic. When markets for soybeans and other traditional crops faltered, farmers in the Deep South began looking for more profitable ways to use their land. Some farmers diked and flooded their fields, converting them to catfish ponds. Using the same workers and the same tractors that once were busy cultivating row crops, these American farmers produced $200 million worth of catfish in 1983. Sometimes they pulled as much as $180,000 worth from a single pond. Some observers predict this industry will triple in the next 20 years. During the 18 months that catfish live in the ponds, they feed on an expensive mixture of soybeans, fish meal, corn, and wheat. But the conversion rate is high. Each pound of feed converts to about half a pound of fish flesh. By comparison, cattle ranchers get only about 1/5 that yield from their steers. Following other agricultural models, catfish farmers have organized themselves into the Catfish Farmers of America. The association attempts to standardize product quality and develop new markets. Although catfish sell best in the South, these flash-frozen fillets are destined for supermarkets in Chicago, part of the industry's aggressive effort to expand markets. In their diet, Americans do not depend on fish for protein. Maybe they never will. So the challenge to industry lies in convincing consumers that they'd rather eat farm-raised catfish than red meat, poultry, or other seafoods. Not much convincing is needed in Mississippi and Arkansas, where catfish fries are already something of a tradition. The success of catfish culture in the South is based on the use of farm technology. But some aquatic species have long been considered too wild to confine in the conventional agricultural way. One such example is the far-ranging salmon. Today, many salmon populations are maintained with the help of a form of aquaculture tailored to the salmon's unique natural life cycle. In nature, this cycle of life begins where it ends, in streams like the tributaries of Oregon and Washington's Columbia River. Salmon are migratory. They are born in freshwater streams, swim to the sea where they grow for several years, and then return as adults to the very stream where they were born. The adult females lay their eggs, typically 2,000 to 4,000, in these gravel stream beds. The males fertilize them, and then the adults die. For thousands of years, salmon populations were totally dependent upon these clean, gravel-bottom streams for reproduction. Unfortunately, human activities have destroyed many of these once productive salmon streams. Native salmon populations have become threatened, and a huge, once profitable fishing industry has declined. To preserve this industry, state, provincial, and federal governments in the United States and Canada now use aquaculture techniques. They've constructed hatcheries which are designed to replace the destroyed stream beds. When the adult salmon return from the sea, they enter hatchery raceways, where they are held until ready to spawn. In one of the most modern hatcheries in the northwestern United States, federal employees periodically check the adult fish. Those that are ready to spawn will first be killed and then stripped of eggs. Hatchery procedures like these are the result of decades of experience and fine-tuning. The workers fertilize the eggs with the milk of the males. Sperm from several males are used with each group of eggs to ensure genetic variability. The fertile eggs go into hatchery trays, where a constant flow of oxygen-rich water bathes them as they mature. Environmental conditions are controlled and monitored very precisely to assure maximum survival. Over the course of about 85 days, an egg becomes a tiny fish. Early on, the eye forms. The circulatory system becomes more and more prominent with time. At the moment when the egg hatches, the tail and head pop out. Finally, these tiny salmon, called sac fry, absorb their yolk sac in a process called buttoning up. Hatcheries are very efficient. 60 to 80% of the eggs raised here produce fry which survive to migrate to the sea. In nature, fewer than 10% survive. Once the salmon leave the hatchery, they are on their own. Unlike pond-raised catfish, which must be fed and cared for daily, salmon feed freely in the open ocean. Oregon State University salmon expert Jim Lennon explains why this form of aquaculture works so well.
We can produce the juveniles quite inexpensively in hatcheries. We can release them into the marine environment, and by virtue of their migratory behavior, they will move to productive feeding grounds, they will harvest energy from natural production, and they will return it to us in the form of adult salmon flesh.
Adult salmon, fat from a few years of grazing the North Pacific, have been a favorite target of commercial fishermen for more than 100 years. As natural spawning habitat continues to be lost, however, salmon populations, as well as salmon fishermen and processors in the United States, become more and more dependent on publicly financed hatcheries. But despite these very productive hatcheries, the salmon industry in the United States is having trouble making financial ends meet. The reasons are many. In some cases, there are fewer fish to be caught. The cost of catching them rises year after year. Government regulations have also been blamed for poor harvests. But there is another reason for these financial problems. It's competition, not from foreign fishermen, but from European sea farmers, like those in Scotland. Atlantic salmon have suffered many of the same problems as their Pacific counterparts: environmental damage, pollution, and overfishing. But the Scottish people have dealt with the problems differently. By far, the majority of salmon that come from this region now are neither produced by public hatcheries nor caught by commercial fishermen. They are raised by private companies such as Golden Sea Produce. These companies do not ranch salmon. They confine the fish throughout their lives in floating net pens. By confining the salmon, these sea farming companies can get a large percentage of their fish to survive until harvest. This year, Golden Sea Produce will process nearly 1 million pounds of salmon from a few net pens floating in Scotland's lochs. Aquaculture operations like these are quite efficient. Golden Sea employs only 20 people. They can harvest their crop of salmon when the market is strongest, when the fish are in best condition, and when their processing plant is ready to handle them. Pen culture of salmon, like that for yellowtail, is far more efficient than depending on nature to nurture salmon at sea and then hunting them down with hooks and lines. In fact, the efficiency of aquaculture worries many fishermen around the world. They are beginning to wonder if sea farmers will be able to market fish more cheaply and reliably than they can. To understand why traditional fishing is often so inefficient and why many American fishermen fear aquaculture, we can look at North America's Chesapeake Bay. Oystermen have been leaving port at dawn from Tillman Island, Maryland, for centuries. Today, most are the sons and grandsons of oyster fishermen, and they are still doing things much the way their grandfathers did. In Bill Cummings' great-grandfather's day, oysters were plentiful in Old Shellfish Bay, and a waterman could make a good living. One way of harvesting the oysters has always been by tonguing, scooping the oysters into metal rakes at the end of 2 long poles and wrestling them to the surface. Before Bill Cummings was born, watermen used to pull some 15 million bushels of oysters from the bay bottom each year. Today, 2 million would be a good harvest. There just aren't as many oysters in the bay as there once were. Some blame overfishing for the decline. Others say disease, pollution, and destruction of oyster habitat are responsible. Whatever the reasons, it's tough to make a living as an oysterman these days. After sorting out the empty shell, Bill will return to the dock today with only about 5 bushels of live oysters. He'll go home with less than $50 in his pocket. Despite poor harvests, there are a lot of fishermen competing for this shrinking resource. Working alongside the oyster tongers are fishermen like Wadey Murphy. He commands the skipjack Sigsbee, part of the last commercial sailing fleet left in America. Using a metal and nylon drag, his boat dredges the bottom of Chesapeake Bay, powered only by the wind. In each drag, these fishermen often bring up only about a dozen live oysters. The rest is empty shell. Like tonguing, this is an inefficient way to harvest oysters, but it's legislated inefficiency. The government controls the fishery and puts strict limits on the harvest and on the fishermen's techniques. The state is trying to protect the remaining oysters from overexploitation while preserving the skipjacks and tongers. But this is only a Band-Aid solution to a basic problem. There simply aren't enough oysters to support the number of fishermen on Chesapeake Bay. Another approach to this problem has been to revitalize the oyster fishery by supplementing the natural supply of oysters with those produced by aquaculture. But some traditional fishermen fear that aquaculture will permanently change their way of life. On Deal Island, in an old abandoned oyster packing house, University of Maryland biologist George Krantz explains how oyster culture might work.
What we're suggesting is that we use oyster hatchery technology and intensive culture systems like are used in other parts of the world to produce oysters in the bay. We've converted this old packing house into a low-cost oyster hatchery that uses only the bare essentials for raising oysters. We have no lights, air conditioning. It only operates seasonally. It's a low-cost facility. The only thing we do is spawn the oysters, raise the larvae during the summer months, set them on shell, grow them up, and put them overboard.
The process begins with a male oyster. It emits a cloud of sperm, stimulating female oysters to release millions of eggs into the water. Chance encounters of sperm and egg produce the next generation of oysters. Krantz hopes to seed Chesapeake Bay with young oysters. He has been working on this hatchery technology for several years. Progress has been slow. Fishermen like Wadey Murphy are eager for results, but he's also skeptical.
So far, they've only proven that they can grow them, but by the time they get them grown and put them on the beds, in other words, you'll have more into them than what you'll get out of them when you get them back. And they're getting all this federal money and state money grants to make these tests or whatever you want to call it. And so far, they ended up with nothing other than they can grow them. They can hatch them and all, but they can't do it on a big scale enough for the. They've been doing it for years, and they never had. I've never seen any they brought out to dump on the ground. But they spent it. It's been a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money.
Aquaculture research is expensive. Sometimes many years pass before any tangible results can be seen. In the United States, aquaculture research has emphasized luxury species such as oysters, salmon, and shrimp. Because these species command higher prices, they are more likely to provide enough return on investments to justify the substantial research and development costs. For a long time, people have wanted to culture shrimp in the United States because shrimp are the most valuable of U.S. seafoods. American fishermen have not been able to harvest enough to meet demand. 65% of the shrimp eaten in this country are imported. Demand continues year-round, but the natural life cycle of shrimp in temperate waters restricts the harvest to about 6 months of the year. Fishing boats and processing plants must shut down in the off-season. It would seem an ideal opportunity for aquaculturists to step in and provide fresh shrimp during the off-season. But until recently, no one could get the female shrimp to produce healthy young in captivity. Would-be shrimp farmers had to collect juvenile shrimp from estuaries to stock their hatcheries and grow-out ponds. After years of working on the problem, scientists perfected a surgical technique which could be used with captive animals to accelerate sexual maturation. The operation, called an eye ablation, involves the delicate removal of one of the eye stalks. The endocrine glands which control sexual maturation in the shrimp are located on the stalks just behind the eye. Removing one stalk shifts the animal's hormonal balance, pushing her toward reproductive condition. This technique gave scientists a powerful new tool that paved the way for breeding experiments, allowing scientists to mate shrimp of different species. Addison Lawrence of Texas A&M University explains.
One of the major advances in technology that we have recently obtained is the ability to artificially inseminate the female shrimp in captivity. For the first time, we were able to breed the Gulf of Mexico white shrimp with the Pacific Ocean white shrimp and actually obtained viable offspring.
With the aid of a mild electric shock, a graduate student draws out of the male shrimp a sperm packet or spermatophore. The milky, sticky substance, placed on tweezers, teems with sperm. Meanwhile, another student secures a receptive female, belly up in a watery trough, where she will be implanted with the male sperm. This process, though tedious, is well worth the time. A single female impregnated in this way can produce 100,000 young shrimp. At Texas A&M, the shrimp are transferred to grow-out ponds, where they take about 4 months to mature. As it has in cattle, genetic selection could lead to meatier, faster-growing strains of shrimp. But Jim Lannon reminds us that aquaculture is decades behind agriculture.
And consequently, it will be some time before we can expect to realize the sorts of breeding gains that have been realized in other agricultural commodities in aquaculture. The potential is there to do it, however.
The future of aquaculture worldwide is promising indeed, but in the United States, its success is less certain. While there are many unanswered scientific questions, the chief impediment to growth in this new industry is not technology.
The major constraints to expanding world aquaculture are not so much technological as social and political. We presently have the technology to go way beyond where we are at the present time in terms of large-scale aquacultural production. But to understand why we are not making better use of aquaculture at the present time, one needs to look at the cultural background, the human cultural background in which we're attempting to develop aquaculture.
Culture has played an important role in the development of aquaculture in Hawaii, where the government takes an active role in promoting it. But among states, Hawaii is the exception, not the rule. One of Hawaii's more important investments is the Anuenue Hatchery. State employees raise juvenile freshwater prawns here and give them to Hawaiians wishing to privately raise them. Commitment to aquaculture in this state begins with Governor George Ariyoshi.
Because we have made an assessment of the kind of state that we are and the kind of state that we want Hawaii to be at some point in the future. And as we look at the kind of state we want Hawaii to be, we have determined that tourism is going to be a very important part. It is today and will be. But in order for it to be that important, we feel that we have to look at Hawaii being kept a very nice place. And many years ago in Hawaii, we had many Hawaiian fish ponds that were in existence. And the aquaculture is, in a sense, a return to the old life, to bring back some of the natural beauties that, qualities that have existed here in our community. And we believe that it is in keeping with the idea of making Hawaii a place where we retain a lot of the environmental, natural beauty, natural qualities of our state. At the same time, these things produce dollars and jobs for the citizens of our community.
Partly because of the governor's commitment, freshwater prawns have become an important local product. Hawaiians harvested nearly $2 million worth in 1983. The state of Hawaii has been eager to see small-scale aquaculture develop. They've encouraged landowners to build ponds and have given them educational materials and practical training. Despite a few isolated success stories like prawns in Hawaii and catfish in Mississippi, commercial aquaculture hasn't really taken off in the United States. Some proponents of aquaculture, expecting more rapid growth in this industry, blame state and federal government indifference for what they see as the failure of aquaculture in the United States. For example, they say the lengthy and costly permit process is a deterrent. Seeking a more favorable climate for their aquaculture investments, many American companies have chosen to look outside the boundaries of the United States. The Ralston Purina Company, for example, has moved its entire shrimp operation from Florida to Panama. Its decision to do so was based on several factors. The political climate is better. Panama is less stringent in its regulatory demands. The physical climate is better too. The company can now raise shrimp year-round, rather than seasonally, as was the case in Florida. Another major reason for making the move was the availability of cheap labor in Panama. One of the keys to Ralston's success in Panama has been its shrimp feed. The company has developed a nutrient-rich mixture of grains that holds together well in the water and is easy for shrimp to find and eat. At the time of harvest, Panamanians release water from the ponds. This swirling seawater carries the shrimp into waiting nets. Ralston Purina has constructed 1,500 acres of shrimp ponds near the town of Agua Dulce, Panama. More are being built. The company produced 3 million pounds of shrimp from these facilities last year, employing about 200 Panamanians in the process. Their aggressive expansion program is based on what company officials see as a very profitable new source of shrimp for the lucrative North American market. To Panama, this aquaculture operation means jobs, new industrial development, and more money coming into the country. Many developing countries are eager for such foreign investments. But the head of the United Nations-supported International Rice Institute, M.S. Swaminathan, cautions developing nations to see that some of the profits stay at home.
If the local people will be used only as daily paid wage earners, then they will suffer because the women and children will have less nutrition and so on. On the other hand, if there is a producer-oriented marketing, if the total income goes up, then they can use some of the money for food, some for better clothing, a little bit of better housing and hygiene and so on. So we require both food and money. And I will not say that any project in design for export purposes is wrong, provided the benefit from the additional income also go to some of the poorer sections. So long as we use that as the yardstick, then I think modern technology is indispensable and is important for converting natural resources into wealth. But whether that wealth then adds to human happiness or to human sorrow is a matter which is not related to technology, but related to the other policies of the people who administer those projects.
The people who administer these aquaculture projects in Panama have encouraged foreign investments because of the jobs and money they bring. But they have also seen aquaculture as a potential new source of food for the country's rural people. Richard Preta was one such official. He was educated in the techniques of aquaculture at Auburn University in Alabama, and has taken what he learned there and adapted it to his rural mountainous homeland. The Guaymi Indians live in remote mountain villages and scattered huts, some more than 4 hours from the nearest road. They used to subsist on a diet of plant roots and insects. When cattle were introduced to this region, forests were cut, and the Guaymi settled down, grazing cattle on the steep mountain slopes. But the bare mountains eroded under heavy rains, and the land became impoverished. Preto and his staff helped the Guaymi build small fish ponds and manage the water that flows across their land.
We have approached aquaculture in an integrated way. It really means more than placing the emphasis in fish culture is the management of water.
Today, the Indians practice polyculture, adapting the ancient Chinese methods to the rugged realities of Panama. Water from the hillsides is diverted through pig pens and chicken coops. Animal manure fertilizes the pond water, where the Guaymi raise carp as well as an African fish called tilapia. The rich runoff passes through the ponds and is then used to irrigate vegetables. Periodically, the Guaymi harvest the ponds. It's been said that aquaculture will never feed the world's hungry people because it takes too much energy to produce each pound of fish. But this system works. Its success is based on integrating watershed management techniques with livestock, fish, and vegetable production. The solar energy which drives the system is free. It stimulates plant production on the hillside. Livestock eat the plants. Their manure transfers the energy to the pond, where hardy carp and tilapia convert it to food for the Guaymi. The 4 ponds in this settlement can be expected to yield 5,000 pounds of fish for the Indians to eat each year. Before aquaculture was introduced to this settlement, the Indians had never cleaned or eaten fish, had never tasted a tomato. Preto's work has just begun, but it shows great potential. It is a model that is also being applied in other developing nations throughout the world.
Ustedes pudieron ver las vistas fijas, el franelógrafo.
Extension agents continue the work Preto began by teaching prospective fish farmers how to determine the condition of their fish and how to care for their ponds.
De los módulos de cría que ustedes tienen en sus comunidades. Vamos a usar hoy la tinta para pintar el sexo y poder tener más facilidad.
Just as Panama is a model for aquaculture in developing nations, Japan is a model for industrialized nations. Many of the elements of the aquaculture story come together here in Akashi, on the shores of Japan's inland sea. The crop these farmers of the sea tend is the most valuable aquaculture crop in the world, worth more than $1 billion each year. It's nori, a ribbon-like seaweed grown on nets suspended in the water. It's pulled over sharp blades and literally mowed like grass for harvest. Many of these men are the sons and grandsons of fishermen. Others come from rice farming families. Both groups faced economic hardships in recent years and watched their incomes dwindle. They saw aquaculture as an opportunity and have learned to use their traditional skills in new ways. Today, they work at aquaculture in the winter, fishing and farming in the summer. In many cases, these men have more than doubled their personal incomes in the process. For the people of Akashi, winter is a busy time. The men rise before dawn, put to sea, and harvest their crop at first light. By 10 in the morning, the nori is on the dock and headed for the processing plant. These fishermen and rice farmers have adopted aquaculture with little disruption of their age-old way of life. In family-operated processing plants, the nori is washed, minced, pressed into flat sheets like paper, and dried. Though the Japanese have eaten nori for centuries, only during the past few decades have scientists understood enough about the plant's complex life cycle to produce nori in hatcheries. And only with hatchery control of the nori life cycle is this level of production possible. Nori, a staple in Japan, is becoming more familiar to the people of other nations. It is used in many sushi dishes. Night gradually changes to a new day for the nori farmers of Akashi, symbolic perhaps of the gradual change in society's relationship with the ocean. No longer are we to be confined by what we can hunt and gather from the sea. We are learning to cultivate it. Around the world, sea farmers like these now raise about 9 million tons of fish, shellfish, and seaweed, and that number is growing. So where is the Blue Revolution taking us? Many factors will affect its direction, but ultimately, its success or failure will rest with people like these, people who, recognizing opportunity, choose to become farmers of the sea.